6 months ago, Tamworth was in the headlines when a hotel housing asylum seekers was set on fire by a mob.
Violence on the streets of Tamworth as a mob 300 strong attacked a hotel housing asylum seekers.
What is your view broadly on immigration?
Cut it. Look after our own before anybody else. The immigrants come in here and they're held high, more higher than guys that fought for the country. Sleeping rough on the streets. There's a couple in Tamworth that I know.
You really think that people who come here are getting a better deal than people who live here already?
100%. Yeah.
And in what way do you think that's happening? What evidence do you kind of have for that, do you think?
Just by what the government have turned around and said. They get food, they get housing allowance, you name it.
Wayne speaks for, I think, quite a few people said what Wayne said, which is, and Wayne sort of sums up a view we found in the town, which is, on the one hand, absolutely appalled by the violence, to the point where he called them, I won't use the language, but pretty colourful language whenever he talked about them, idiots being the operative word,
Right.
Receded off from my other words, jumping on the bandwagon, did everything he could to try and stop the rioters getting in, to the point where he was next to riot police being pelted with rocks. On the other hand, his view more broadly is that he believes that the town has been used to house asylum seekers and shouldn't be. But I think
to the detriment of other residents, local residents.
And I think that conversation which went on, and I had a long conversation with Wayne, there is a real, I think we can maybe get onto this later, a kind of misunderstanding about asylum seekers, about who they are, what they can do, what their rights are, and I think I took from this whole experience was there is a real lack of understanding, a real lack of communication in this town, in lots of towns in the country, over what asylum is, what the application process is like, who these people are, where they're coming from, what danger they faced, a lot of conspiracy knocking around, and Wayne sort of summarised a lot of that in that conversation.
You spoke to some of the asylum seekers, didn't you, who had been staying in that hotel from war-torn places like Sudan and Iraq and so on. What did they tell you?
They were absolutely traumatised by what they went through. No, they are no longer in Tamworth, they are living somewhere else. We went and met 3 of them, we spoke to them. We did not reveal their identities for obvious reasons, but they, in their words, have sort of fled danger and war in their own countries to come to Britain for safety, and often they come to Britain, they told us, because they believe Britain to be the most tolerant, accepting country that they could arrive at in Europe. Often that's the language also they speak, and so Britain they felt would be a place that would welcome them. The level of hostility they faced was, they could never ever have imagined it, and they believed that night they were going to be attacked, and some believed they were going to die.
Let's talk to Lee Bates. He's the Chief Executive of Community Together in Tamworth.
Lee Bates is the Chief Operating Officer of community interest company Community Together Tamworth.
Let's talk now to Lee Bates, Chief Operating Officer of Community Together in Tamworth.
Across town at the Helping Hands Cafe, asylum seekers who can't work legally while their claims are being processed are volunteering. It's a project set up by Community Together Tamworth, and all the profit they make benefits those who live here.
The community in Tamworth has won an award for the work it's done in bringing people together following the riots in the town last summer. Community Together, CIC, won the Chamber of Commerce Impact Award for a Stop Misinformation campaign and helping asylum seekers to integrate through volunteering schemes.
People who have been very vocal about the hotel have condemned the actions.
Lee Bates runs a charity supporting the asylum population here and says myth and rumour have made them an easy target.
We're in a cost of living crisis and people are struggling. The concern is if they're in a hotel, they're being looked after, etc. And the reality is quite different. You know, there's 3 people to a room, you know, they're not having access to bar facilities or, you know, any of those luxuries. They haven't been allowed to work and, you know, they get £8.40 a week from the government. So I think the perception's different to the reality.
You spoke to a charity, didn't you, Community Together, who support some of these people, and they spoke to you about what took place. What was their view? What did they say?
They I've felt this rumbling. They've seen this rumbling, this tension kind of creeping in the last few months, and that a guy called Lee, who runs the centre, was telling me how they've tried to do some outreach work in the community to try and kind of break down the barriers. Often I found that there's been a real dehumanisation of those seeking asylum. They're treated as like one homogenous block. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of conspiracy over why they're here and what they can do, and that charity tried to do some work in the months and weeks leading up, but they started to see, I think, things online, and we'll talk about that in a moment, on social media creeping in, of people anger building around the use of the hotel, and they felt, and Lee, who runs the charity, feels, that there is a view in the town that this group of people are in the hotel that Tamworth had before, and they are getting a pretty good life. They're in a hotel, they're getting 3 meals a day, being paid for by the government, and he was saying that is far from the truth. It's not a hotel as people imagine. It's often 3 or 4 to a room. They get £8 a week. They can't work. The food they get often is not great, and they have no choice over it. They can't leave Tamworth. They've been placed there by the government. But there's this perception that this group of people are getting something, while people in the community and a cost of living crisis are really, really struggling. And that friction had been allowed to build up over the last few months.